There is a very specific moment in your life that almost no one can identify while it is happening. And the most dangerous thing is that this moment doesn't seem special. It doesn't seem powerful. And it certainly doesn't seem like a breakthrough. He seems confused. It feels like a kind of inner silence that offers no answers, no direction, and none of that sense of certainty you hope to feel when you were finally making progress. And that's exactly why so many people get lost here. Because they were taught to recognize growth through movement, visible progress, clear results and external signs. But when real change begins, none of that comes first. What emerges is a strange silence that cannot be explained by ordinary logic. You continue living the same days, dealing with the same people, seeing the same environment around you, but there's something inside you that no longer responds in the same way. And this creates a type of discomfort that isn't pain but isn't peace either. It's an interior space that didn't exist before. And it is at this point that doubt begins to grow. The uncertainty of being stopped, the uncertainty of being lost, the uncertainty of having done something wrong along the way. But the truth is different. This silence is not absence. This silence is a reconfiguration. And if you don't understand that, you try to get out of it too quickly. You try to fill the void with distractions, with old patterns, with impulsive decisions. And that's exactly how most people interrupt their own timeline shift. But if you can remain here consciously, something inevitably begins to happen. Your reality begins to reorganize itself from within. And today you're going to understand the signs that show this has already begun, even if you still haven't been able to name what's happening. The first sign doesn't look like progress. It looks like internal confusion. If you are experiencing this moment, then this sign needs to be understood in depth. Because he doesn't present himself clearly, he doesn't offer an explanation, and he doesn't validate you immediately. He disorients you first. You continue living your routine, but you start to notice small internal disruptions. Things that used to be automatic cease to be. Thoughts that once came with force now seem weaker or disconnected. Reactions that were once natural now require effort to occur. And this doesn't happen all at once. This happens gradually, in almost imperceptible details. And that's exactly why your mind can't interpret it correctly. Because your mind works based on known patterns. She needs to recognize something in order to understand. And what's happening here doesn't fit any old pattern. Then she enters a state of confusion. And it is at this point that that strange emptiness appears. It's not an emptiness of deep sadness. It's not a void of lack of purpose. It's a transitional void. It's as if what sustained its identity until now has been removed. But the new hasn't been fully integrated yet. And this creates an internal space that has no point of reference. You try to think like you used to, and you realize you can't sustain that same line of reasoning. You try to react as before and feel that something doesn't fit. You try to care about things that used to be important and realize that the intensity isn't the same. And this begins to generate a silent conflict. Part of you wants to return to what is familiar, because the familiar brings a sense of control. But another group no longer accepts that standard. And this second part doesn't scream. She doesn't argue. She simply doesn't respond anymore. And that's what causes the most destabilization. Because there is no clear confrontation. There is a progressive disconnection. And this disconnect makes it seem like you're lost. But in reality, you're moving away from an old way of operating. This is the point where the frequency exchange truly begins. Not as a concept, not as a pretty idea, but as an internal experience. Your system will automatically begin rejecting anything that no longer corresponds to its new state. And since the new system isn't yet fully established, you're stuck between two extremes, unable to fully return to the old ways and still lacking complete stability in the new. And this is exactly where most people make the biggest mistake. They interpret this phase as a problem. They try to fix it. They are trying to return to what was comfortable. They try to regain control through old patterns, and in doing so, they interrupt the process. But when you understand that this confusion is not a flaw, but rather an initial sign of internal reorganization, everything changes. You stop resisting. You stop forcing immediate answers. You allow the process to happen. And when you allow it, the transition continues. Second sign, what previously made sense begins to lose its logic on its own. If you recognize the previous sign within yourself, then the next step in this change begins to reveal itself in an even more concrete way. Now, it's not just an internal feeling that's hard to explain. Now you're starting to notice clear changes in how you view your own life. Things that once made sense begin to lose their logic without you having made any effort to do so. And that's very important to understand. It wasn't a rational decision. It wasn't a process of persuasion. It wasn't someone who showed you a new path. The change happened first within you, and is now altering how you interpret everything around you. You start noticing old habits and feel an immediate disconnect. Things that used to be normal now seem out of place. Environments that were once comfortable now feel heavy or meaningless. Conversations that once captivated you no longer spark your interest. And the most curious thing is that this doesn't come with guilt. You don't feel like you made mistakes in the past. You feel no shame for what you've been through. You just realize that it no longer represents who you are now. And this perception creates a very specific kind of distance. You look at your own past choices as if you were observing another person. And on some level, that's exactly what's happening. Because your identity is changing. And when identity changes, automatic behavior begins to fail. What used to happen effortlessly now requires awareness. And often, even consciously, you can no longer sustain it. You try to repeat old patterns and feel an internal block. It's not a lack of discipline. It's not a lack of strength. It's an incompatibility. His internal system can no longer sustain that. And this begins to create silent ruptures in your life. You stop participating in certain dynamics. You naturally reduce behaviors that were previously frequent. You start to distance yourself from situations without needing confrontation. And all of this happens gradually. No ads, no dramatic decisions, no external explanation needed. And this can create insecurity, because it feels like you're losing parts of yourself. But in reality, you're leaving behind versions that have already served their purpose. And here lies a very profound point. When something loses its meaning effortlessly, it means that the change has already happened internally before it manifests externally. In other words, their internal reality has already been reorganized. Now the outside world is starting to catch up. And this process does not depend on external validation to be real. It's already underway. And the more you try to resist, the more discomfort you feel. But the more you accept this change without needing to understand everything immediately, the more fluid the process becomes. Now tell me precisely, is this the ideal level, or do you want even more density and impact? If approved, I'll move on to the third and fourth signals, further intensifying the internal conflict and the feeling of real transformation. Third sign, you stop reacting, and this changes everything invisibly. If you recognize the previous signs, then what is beginning to happen now is not something you learn. It's something you perceive happening within you, almost without your mind's permission. You start to notice that there's a delay between what's happening outside and how you respond. And this delay completely changes your experience. Before, everything was immediate. Someone would say something and you could already feel it. If something went wrong, you would react. A thought would arise and you'd immediately dive into it. Now this is starting to break down. You perceive the stimulus, but you don't engage with it in the same way. And at first, this is uncomfortable because it feels like something is out of place. You expect an automatic reaction, but it doesn't come with the same intensity. You feel the old impulse trying to resurface, but it doesn't dominate like it used to. It's as if your system is still trying to function in the old way, but something new is blocking that response. And this new thing isn't forced control. It is a lack of identification. This is much deeper than it seems. You are not fighting against the old pattern. You are ceasing to recognize yourself in him. And when you don't recognize yourself, you can't sustain yourself. That's why many people in the comments say that the old self seems to be reacting on its own, as if it's trying to survive. because that's exactly what happens. The old pattern is trying to reassert itself. It tries to pull you back. It activates familiar thoughts, memories, and emotions, but this time you don't go in with the same force. And this creates a very specific type of internal tension. On one side, the old system trying to maintain control. On the other hand, there is a quieter presence that observes without becoming fully involved. And this presence is starting to gain ground. You begin to realize that you can feel something without having to act on it. You can observe a thought without turning it into truth. You can be in a situation without letting it consume you. And that changes everything, because its energy is no longer captured automatically. Previously, any situation had direct access to its internal state. Now there is a filter, and this filter is not a defense. It's awareness. You begin to choose, even if subtly, where your energy will reside, and this begins to weaken entire cycles. Discussions stop escalating, anxiety levels stop rising, fears cease to repeat themselves with the same intensity. And this isn't happening because the world has changed. It happens because you stopped feeding those responses. And when you stop feeding it, it starts to lose strength. This is the beginning of true dominion. It's not strict control, it's not emotional repression, it's about no longer being driven automatically. And this generates a very profound change in your frequency. Because now your energy is not being wasted on constant reactions. It starts to accumulate. And when energy accumulates with awareness, it transforms into direction. This is the point where you start to move out of reactive mode and into creator mode. Even if you don't fully realize it yet. Fourth sign, your attention shifts and reality begins to respond to it. If you've noticed that you're no longer reacting the way you used to, then something even more important is starting to happen. Your attention begins to reorganize itself. And this doesn't happen by force. You don't decide to stop focusing on the negative. It simply doesn't sustain the same kind of focus anymore. Previously, his mind was trained to look for trouble, to anticipate error, to repeat scenarios that reinforced insecurity. It was almost automatic. Now this pattern is starting to fail. You still notice problems, but they don't dominate your mind. They don't occupy the same space. They are not expanding as they used to. And at the same time, something new begins to emerge. Your mind begins to notice possibilities. Simple things, but things that used to go unnoticed. Ideas are starting to emerge more clearly. Paths that were previously overlooked are beginning to make sense. And this doesn't come from exaggerated enthusiasm. It comes as a clearer perception, more direct, more stable. You start to look at situations and see beyond the surface. And that completely changes the way you live, because reality doesn't change outside first. It changes in ways that you can perceive. And when your perception changes, your decisions change. When your decisions change, your paths change. And when their paths change, reality inevitably follows. That's why some people start to feel that life is responding differently. Not because something magical happened out of nowhere, but because the way of observing has changed. And that creates alignment. You start acting with more precision, with less urgency, with less despair, and that reduces resistance. Things are starting to happen without the excessive effort that previously seemed necessary. And at the same time, that which is not aligned begins to drift away without direct conflict. No need for dramatic breakups. It simply ceases to be sustainable. And that can give you the feeling that you're missing out on things. But in reality, you're freeing up space for something that matches your new status. Now connect that with what appeared in the comments you saw. People saying they trust in silence. That's not a nice phrase. This is a true understanding of this stage. Because when your attention stops being drawn by fear and begins to stabilize, you no longer need constant confirmation. You start to trust the process even without seeing everything yet. And that's extremely rare, because most people only believe it when it's already happened. Here you start supporting it sooner, and that changes the game completely, because reality begins to respond not to what you want, but to what you consistently uphold internally. And now you're starting to support yourself differently. If this makes sense to you on a level you can't ignore, then you didn't arrive here by accident. Sign up now, because the next signs will delve even deeper into this and show the point where this change stops being internal and starts to become truly visible. Fifth sign. The feeling ceases to be a reaction and becomes a conscious support of your internal state. If you have truly navigated the previous signs without reverting to old patterns, then something much deeper begins to take root within you, something that completely changes how you relate to reality. You begin to realize that what you feel no longer automatically stems from what happens outside. And this doesn't happen as a technique. It's not a constant effort to control emotions. It's not a type of forced positive thinking. It is a structural change in the way your internal state is organized. Before, you were guided by the environment. If something got out of control, his internal state followed suit. If someone affected you, you absorbed it immediately. If a situation generated doubt, his mind amplified that doubt until it dominated his perception. Now this mechanism is starting to fail. You still notice what's happening outside, but it's no longer pulled in with the same intensity. A sense of stability is beginning to form. And this stability does not depend on confirmation. This is the hardest point for the mind to accept, because the mind has been trained to function with evidence. She wants results before she believes. She wants security before she can relax. She wants control before she can trust. But now you start supporting a state even without those guarantees. And this creates a very specific type of internal tension. On one side, the mind is trying to seek external validation. On the other hand, there's something quieter inside you that no longer needs that validation to continue. This is where many people describe exactly what appeared in the comments you analyzed. The old me begins to react. He tries to pull up old thoughts. It tries to reignite insecurities. It attempts to elicit known emotional responses. But this time, you realize, and more than you realize it, you don't fully enter into it. You feel the urge, but you don't give in to it. And that's a decision. Not a rational decision requiring considerable effort, but it was an internal decision not to return to the same standard. And this decision keeps being repeated in small moments, in simple situations, in thoughts that once dominated, but now no longer do. And each time you don't participate, you weaken the old pattern, and it strengthens the new state. This is identity building. You're not just changing behavior. You are ceasing to be the person who used to react that way. And that changes everything. Because when the internal state begins to be sustained by choice and not by reaction turn, it gains consistency. And consistency is what transforms intention into reality. Now connect that directly to that strong pattern in the comments. People repeatedly saying they trust in silence. This is not just a statement. That's internal positioning. They are choosing to support a state even without seeing the full result. And that's rare, because most people give up at that point. Most people react again. Most try to force external evidence. But whoever supports it changes it, because reality starts to respond negatively to what you want to feel. But it depends on what you can sustain continuously. And here is the most important point about this signal. You start to realize that you no longer need to wait for something to happen in order to feel different. You begin to become the foundation of the state that you previously sought outside yourself. And when that happens, the demonstration ceases to be a quest. It begins to become a consequence. Sixth sign. Things start to flow, but in a way that breaks your old logic of effort and control. If you have maintained this new state without going back, then the next change begins to appear in a practical way, but not in the way your mind was used to expecting. Because now things are starting to flow. But this flow does not follow the old logic of effort, pressure, and control. And this can cause some confusion, because you've been conditioned to believe that anything of value requires constant effort. Because without struggle, there is no victory. Without pressure, there is no progress. But now you're starting to notice a different dynamic. Situations that previously required a great deal of effort are beginning to resolve themselves with less resistance. Decisions that previously caused doubt are beginning to emerge with greater clarity. Movements that previously seemed stalled are beginning to find more direct paths, and that doesn't happen because you're doing more. In reality, you're often doing less but with more alignment, and that completely changes the outcome, because it's not about the quantity of action, it's quality of management. You start acting with more precision, without that urge to try to control everything at once, without that urgency to solve everything immediately. And this reduces internal noise, reduces wear and tear. It reduces conflict. And when the internal conflict diminishes, the external conflict begins to reorganize. Now, something very important is beginning to happen. Things start to slip away from your life, but not in the dramatic way you imagined. Not through fights, intense ruptures, or major confrontations. They simply cease to support themselves. Connections lose strength. Situations cease to occur. Environments cease to make sense. And this can generate subtle discomfort, because it feels like you're missing something. But in reality, you're creating space. And at the same time, new possibilities begin to emerge naturally, without that arduous effort of chasing after something, without the feeling of forcing doors. Things are starting to respond to their state, and this connects directly to that pattern that appeared in the comments. People saying they are in the middle of it. They are not reacting, but they also haven't seen everything happen yet. That's exactly the point. You didn't go back to the old way, but it hasn't fully arrived at the new one yet. And this space requires trust. Not a trust based on evidence, but a confidence based on internal perception. You begin to realize that there is a movement happening, even if it is not yet completely visible. And that changes your relationship with time. You no longer fall into despair. You don't feel the same urgency. You don't try to force everything to happen. You begin to allow the process. And allowing is not passivity. It's alignment. You continue to act, but without excessive resistance. And this creates a type of fluidity that didn't exist before. Now pay close attention to this. This flow is not random. He is the answer, response to the state you are supporting. And the more consistent this state becomes, the more consistent the flow becomes as well. And that takes it to the next level, where you stop feeling like you need to chase after everything, and you start to realize that some things are beginning to come to you. If this is making sense to you in a way that you can't ignore, then you're living it now. You're not just understanding it. Subscribe to the channel, because the next signs show the point at which this change becomes irreversible. 7th sign. You realize you no longer need to chase after everything, and this dismantles your old control system. If you've held on to everything up until now, then this change is starting to affect something that previously seemed impossible to alter: your relationship with control. For a long time, you believed that you needed to anticipate everything, predict everything, guarantee everything. It was as if your safety depended directly on how much you were able to act, plan, and control every detail of your life. And this didn't stem solely from ambition. It came from fear. Fear of wasting time, fear of being left behind, fear of not being able to do it. This fear created a sense of urgency. And the urgency created a constant state of internal tension. Even when nothing was happening, his mind was racing, always trying to adjust, correct, avoid, guarantee. Now something is starting to break. And it's not because you decided to relax, it's because that system has lost its power within you. You begin to realize that not everything depends on your direct intervention. Not everything needs to be resolved immediately. Not everything needs to be controlled in order to work. And this initially seems strange, because your mind associates lack of control with risk. She interprets this new attitude as carelessness, but deep down, something more profound has already been understood. You begin to act with more precision and less anxiety. You start to make better choices about where you put your energy. You begin to realize that there are times to act and times to allow. And this distinction completely changes the outcome. Because before, you were acting all the time. Now you act when it makes sense. And this significantly reduces internal wear and tear. Now connect that with what appeared in the comments. People saying they're in the middle of the process, that their old self is still trying to react. That old self is exactly that control system. He tries to pull you back into the urgency. He tries to make you feel like you need to do something now, solve everything now, secure everything now. But you start to notice this movement, and more importantly, you start to not obey automatically. And that's a huge disruption, because for the first time, you're not being guided by fear disguised as productivity. You are beginning to act from alignment, and when that happens, something very important changes. You stop chasing after everything, and you start to realize that some things are beginning to align without forced effort, not because you gave up, but that's because you moved away from the frequency of scarcity and into the frequency of precision, and that opens the door to the next level. 8th sign. Reality begins to respond subtly, and you realize you are no longer alone in the process. If you've made it this far, then your perspective is no longer the same. And that's exactly what allows you to start seeing something that previously went completely unnoticed. Reality is starting to respond, but not in the way his mind expected. It doesn't come as one big event that proves everything at once. It comes in small, but extremely specific signs. And these signs don't make sense to someone who isn't in that state. But to you, they are clear. You start noticing coincidences that no longer seem like coincidences. Meetings that seem to fit together perfectly. Information that arrives exactly when you need it. Ideas emerge with a clarity that didn't exist before. And most importantly, you start to notice a sequence. These are not isolated events. There is a pattern. And when you notice a pattern, something changes internally. Because the pattern indicates direction. Direction indicates alignment. Now connect that directly to the comments you saw. People repeatedly saying they trust in silence, that they're not saying this without reason. They begin to notice these signs, even if they don't have everything yet. Even though they are still in the middle of the transition, they've seen enough to understand that something is responding. And that makes it stronger, because now it's not just an internal feeling. An external correspondence is beginning to emerge, and that changes how you position yourself. You stop doubting yourself all the time. You stop constantly seeking validation. You start to notice more, to trust more, interpreting reality in a different way. And this creates a new connection with the process. You start to feel like you're not trying alone anymore, that there is a response happening. And this is not fantasy. That's refined perception. Now, there's a very important point here. These signs are subtle for a reason. They are not meant to convince your mind. They are meant to strengthen your awareness. Because if they came on too intensely, you would revert to a pattern of external dependence. But since they come in a subtle way, you need to be present to notice them. And that keeps you in the right state. And the more you realize it, the stronger you become. And the more you strengthen it, the more reality responds. And this creates a new cycle, an alignment cycle. Ninth sign. You simply know that you've already changed, and there's no going back to who you were. If you've made it this far, then this last sign doesn't come as a discovery. It comes as recognition. You don't need to analyze it. You don't need to prove it. You don't need to convince anyone. You just know. And this knowledge is not emotional in the sense of euphoria. It's not that intense feeling that comes and then goes. It's something much more stable, much quieter. You look at yourself and realize you can no longer be who you used to be. Even if he tried, even if I wanted to go back to the old standard, something would prevent it, because its internal structure changed. His way of thinking has changed. His way of reacting changed. His way of perceiving things has changed. And most importantly, his way of positioning himself has changed. You no longer depend on the same validation. You no longer respond to the same triggers. You no longer subscribe to the same internal narratives. And this creates a stability that didn't exist before. Even without all the external results, even without everything being resolved, you feel a different foundation. And this foundation changes everything. Because now you're not trying to change. You've already changed. Now the outside world just needs to follow along. And that eliminates despair. Eliminate the rush. It eliminates the need for proof. You enter a state where you continue to act, but without that constant anxiety. You keep moving forward, but without that feeling of being behind. And that is extremely powerful, because most people spend their lives trying to reach a state that you've already begun to access. Now connect that to the strongest pattern in the comments. I trust the silence shaping me. That's not a statement. This is internal confirmation. These people are no longer asking for a signal. They've already realized it. They've already decided, and this decision is what consolidates the change. Because when you make the decision internally, you stop wavering. And when you stop wavering, your reality begins to stabilize in the same direction. And that's the point where the timeline really changes. Not when you see it, but when you become... Now I want to ask you a question that defines everything. You're still waiting for reality to change before you believe? Or have you already realized that you changed first? If this made sense to you, comment below. I trust in the silence that is transforming me. And if you felt this accurately describe what you're going through, subscribe to the channel. Because that's no coincidence. You didn't end up here by chance. And if you're going through this, you're already in the process. Now answer me with complete honesty. You're still waiting for an external sign to believe? Or have you noticed that the signal has always been internal? If this describes what you're going through, then comment below. I trust in the silence that is transforming me, not as a sentence, but as a decision. And if you've made it this far, subscribe to the channel, because this type of content doesn't appear by chance. And if you understand this, you're no longer at the beginning. You've already passed the point where most people give up. Now it's time to move on and to sustain.